You are standing in the middle of a village. It is 10,000 BCE. The sun is low, the fire is going, and your neighbor just walked over with a haunch of wild boar and dropped it at your feet. No invoice, no Venmo request, no awkward "we'll settle up later." He just handed you meat and walked away. And the strangest part, you weren't confused. You knew exactly what that meant, and you knew exactly what you owed. Now, here's the thing nobody tells you about that moment. It had nothing to do with fairness and everything to do with power. We've been taught a very clean story about money. The textbook version goes like this. First, there was barter. You had wheat, I had chickens, we traded. Then, barter got complicated, so we invented coins. Then, coins gave way to paper, then plastic, then whatever we're doing now with crypto and tap to pay and the vibe economy. It's a tidy little progression, and it sounds perfectly logical. The problem is that it's almost entirely fiction. Anthropologist David Graeber spent years tearing this myth apart, and in 2011 published Debt: The First 5,000 Years, a book that fundamentally changed how economists and historians think about the origins of exchange. His finding, backed by decades of archaeological and anthropological record, was this: there is no historical evidence that barter economies ever existed as a primary means of exchange in pre-monetary societies. Not in Mesopotamia, not in pre-colonial North America, not anywhere. The barter-first story was invented by Adam Smith in 1776, a thought experiment, never an observed fact, and then repeated so many times that it calcified into conventional wisdom. Let's pause here, because that's genuinely wild. The foundation of how we explain money, the "we had to invent it to replace all this messy bartering" story, was made up by an economist who had never actually studied a society without money. It was hypothetical all the way down. So what did people actually do? The answer, and this is the part that will rewire something in you, is that they ran on debt. Not debt the way we think of it, interest rates and credit scores and a vague sense of shame. Debt as relationship. Debt as the living tissue of the community. Researchers at the University of Michigan, studying the newer people of South Sudan in the mid-20th century, documented something that looked bizarre on the surface. A man would give cattle to his neighbor with no expectation of repayment in kind, no fixed timeline, no written agreement. The cattle just moved. What the giver received wasn't cattle back. What he received was obligation, and obligation was more valuable than cattle, because obligation meant he could call on that neighbor during a drought, a raid, a bad harvest, a birth. 14 different people might help build your granary in a single season, none of them expecting immediate payment. 14 people who now owe you something, and you owe them something, and the whole village is one vast, living ledger of mutual debt. Now, here's where a reasonable person might push back. Maybe this was just gift culture. Maybe it was just generosity, and we're projecting economic logic onto what was really just kindness. That's a fair concern, but here's what makes it not hold up. The debts were tracked meticulously, not on paper, in memory, in reputation, in social status. Marcel Mauss, in his foundational work, The Gift, in 1925, showed across dozens of cultures that gift-giving in pre-monetary societies was never truly free. To receive a gift and not reciprocate, not necessarily immediately, not necessarily in the same form, but eventually, was not just rude, it was a form of social death. The Kwakwaka'waka'wak peoples of the Pacific Northwest held ceremonies called potlatches, where chiefs would compete to give away the most wealth, sometimes destroying their own goods, because the act of giving was what generated prestige. The more you gave, the more powerful you became. This inverted everything we assume about accumulation. But the flip side of this is equally interesting. It also means that wealth could be weaponized, giving too generously, giving in a way that the other person could never repay was an act of dominance. You could trap someone in debt the way you could trap them in a cage. And here's where the evidence gets genuinely uncomfortable, because early anthropological records from Mesopotamia, among the earliest civilizations with written records and all, show that debt bondage, humans enslaved not through conquest but through unpayable obligation, predates coined money by thousands of years. The first written word for freedom in Sumerian, amargi, literally meant return to mother, a reference to debt slaves being released and allowed to go home. The concept of freedom had to be invented to describe the end of debt. That should stop you cold. Now here's where it gets complicated. Scholars debate whether these findings apply universally, or whether Graeber's reading of the anthropological record was itself too clean, too eager to invert the dominant narrative. Economist Robert Murphy and others have pushed back, arguing that localized barter did occur in specific contexts, with strangers, across tribal lines, in situations where no ongoing relationship existed. The honest answer is that pre-monetary exchange was not one thing. It was a spectrum. Gifts with invisible strings, communal pooling, tribute, redistribution from a central authority, and yes, occasional barter, but only as the exception, not the rule.
Let's zoom all the way out. What does it mean that the foundational unit of human exchange wasn't a price? It was a promise. That before there were markets, there were relationships structured around mutual obligation. That the invisible architecture underneath ancient economies wasn't efficiency. It was trust, maintained through memory, reputation, and the constant circulation of owing and being owed. It means that every financial system humans have ever built has been at its root an attempt to formalize something we already knew how to do. Money didn't teach us to exchange value. It just tried to make the ledger portable. And this is the part that should unsettle you. The next time you split a bill with a friend and feel the slight discomfort of who owes whom, you're feeling something 300,000 years old. Your brain didn't evolve for abstract markets. It evolved for exactly that village, the granary, the cattle that moved without a receipt, the neighbor who dropped the boar and walked away because he knew you'd remember, and you will.